And we're live. Are we live? We're live. Hey, everybody. Sorry. Thank you for your patience. Adam Savage here in my cave with a live stream. This looks like this is going to just drip. Yeah, there we go. That's in frame. Hey there. Today's top stories. Hi, everybody. It feels like it's been a while since I've done a live stream, although I don't think it's been as long as I feel like it's been. I've just been traveling a lot. I am here in my cave in San Francisco. It is a lovely day. This is the first week in San Francisco that we can feel, it feels like we can feel the fall nip in the air. And it's nice to feel a little bit of fall. Valencia Street the other day looked actually almost fall colors as I was walking down it, which is not something you get a lot of in California. I know there are pockets of California, but in San Francisco, the biggest way you know the difference between the seasons is usually by looking at the skies. The skies get spectacular and the transitions between spring and summer, summer and fall, fall and winter, etc. Before I go too much further, I want to tell you today's live stream is sponsored by Blundstone USA. We'll be talking about them later on. I wear them, and like I said, we'll be talking about them later on, but I'm taking some questions, and I have some questions we've gotten already, but this is an open chat, so we're taking questions from everybody. So once I answer a few of these, we'll be checking my texts from the crew and answering some of your questions live. Hi. I think these questions are frequently about MythBusters, but there's also some about Ghostbusters, all the Busters. You know, it's funny that we got to see the Ghostbusters Afterlife in New York last weekend, and it's stunning. I loved it. It is every bit as great as I was hoping it would be, and it's even better. The cast is totally amazing. But only every few weeks does it occur to me that like MythBusters owes its name lineage to Ghostbusters. I keep forgetting that part. Anyway, Mechanics FX Workshop opened right up and asks, what has been the experience like of having a part on the new Ghostbusters set, driving the Ecto-1, seeing all the props? We have so much more coverage of Ghostbusters Afterlife coming up on Tested. We got to spend a full week on the set with Jason and the crew. The cast was super welcoming. There's even some of my old MythBusters Junior cohorts come into this. We get to really embed in a way we rarely get. And Jason Reitman and his whole team was just so generous with their access that it was like a fantasy camp to a certain extent. There is a main set in Ghostbusters Afterlife, and they built it from scratch. That there is a house on a hill. There was only a hill when Jason and the team showed up. They looked everywhere for a house on a hill, and eventually they just found a hill that worked, and they built a house set on it. And that was both an interior and an exterior set. So for the actors, in most movies, when someone like pulls up to a house and walks inside, the moment you cut to the shot inside, they're in a soundstage. They're not in the actual building. It's very rare that you have a set that is both an interior and an exterior at the same time. You asked about driving the Ecto-1. That was crazy great. I knew that I would be covering the Ecto-1, and their stunt driver was like, we had talked about, he's going to let me run through, show me how it worked, show me what they'd done, etc. But I didn't know that he was going to let me drive until in the video when I asked, and he said yes. Like, I learned, as you did, that I was going to be allowed to drive it. There's another question in here about some of the driving stunts that we did on MythBusters. One of the lovely offshoots of all of the tactical driving training that Jamie and I got on the set of the show, I was trained to drive on two wheels, trained to drive up a ramp like in Knight Rider into a truck container and did it, trained to do a reverse bootleg 180. I can drive a tactical course backwards in high heels at a fairly reasonable clip. When we finally were in production on MythBusters Junior, and I was wondering if I could teach young Cannon how to drive when he was only 12 years old. I didn't know about the legalities of putting a 12-year-old in control of an automobile. And it turned out that not only is that okay if you are on a closed course with a certified stunt driver, and my our stud coordinator Nick Plachet certified me to the insurance company as qualified to teach Ken and how to drive, and so I did. That was fantastic. I didn't know I had that certification. I mean, I think it's more like, you work with the insurance company and say, look, you know what he can do. You know his skill base. You've watched it over the years. He can supervise this safely. And I did. That was a funny one because, like, when we first started doing MythBusters and we first become a hit show, we become assets, right? So we're not just talent on the show, but now the show's a hit. We hold a value to the corporation. And thus, there were some interesting parts of the contract. Like, all 5 MythBuster hosts weren't allowed to fly on the same airplane for a long time. And so that also means that the insurance company doesn't want to hurt the assets. So when Jamie and I are about to do dangerous things, they're like, we're going to put some more safety procedures in place. However, as the show progressed, it was frequently the case that Jamie and I and our stunt team and our crew was the most qualified crew in the world to do the thing that we wanted to do. And we had the evidence to show them that we had had experience in this realm before. So unlike most talent on a show that gets popular, we got more latitude to do the dangerous things over the years than less. But that was like, I'm now way past your original question. Seeing all the Ghostbusters props up close with Ben Eady and his crew and all of the special effects crews. And I had friends who were on the crews in LA building this stuff that was getting sent to Calgary. I had friends up in Calgary receiving that stuff, modifying it, playing with it. And every part of Ghostbusters Afterlife was built by crews who loved Ghostbusters. And you can feel it when you touch and handle and see those props up close. And I hope that when the movie comes out, there'll be places like the ArcLight used to be in LA where they put hero props on display so you can see them, because they look great on film. They look even better in person. Yeah, it was a total love letter. And yes, there's fan service in the film of exactly what I consider to be the right kind of fan service. I loved it all the way through. And again, the cast is incredible. Okay. Scott Jenkinson has a question about MythBusters and their production schedule. He says, you've mentioned many times how grueling the production schedule was over the 14-year run of the show. During that time, how did the whole production team stay resilient and keep up their morale? Given your experience in film, TV production, etc., what lessons about team morale and resilience have you brought forward into your work today? This is a great question right now because IATSE is thinking about striking, specifically because of the difficulty that crews are having with the schedules that they're being asked to work. 14-hour days, 12-hour turnarounds, giving everyone fratter days where they work 6.5 days a week, 14, 16 hours a day. Yeah, maintaining crew morale over a long shoot is difficult. It means you've got to give everyone some time to rest. And it's a wonderful question you've asked, Scott, because it was something that we had on our minds a lot. You mentioned the grueling production schedule. For those who don't know, MythBusters was filmed year round. Unlike most TV shows where they shoot for like 6 or 8 months and then they have an off period where a lot of the actors go make movies. MythBusters, we worked 40 odd weeks per year. And the way we did it was we would do 3 months on and about 2 weeks off. 3 months on, 2 weeks off. We always took 4 days off for Thanksgiving, which was always a trade for that Friday with Columbus Day, if I remember correctly. We always took that off. We always took like 2 weeks off or 3 weeks off over Christmas and New Year's, which was lovely. And so, in fact, when you're shooting 40 weeks a year, having a break every 3 months was absolutely critical. And well, going back to having a show that turns out to be a hit, when you are on television and you're on a show, in the beginning, no one's paying attention, right? Like the network is just like they're hoping it flies, but they don't have their hand in your production very much. But when the show starts to have real traction and legs and people start to watch it, everyone starts to pay attention. And as the lead talent, you get a weird kind of power. Right? You have the power to like text the CEO of the company, but that's not that's not a thing you want to do until it really matters, right? Like, and what I mean by that power is you have the ability to kind of to ask a question of anywhere within the sort of corporate hierarchy. Whereas if you're just an employee, you really don't. You got to go to your boss and then they go to their boss, etc. But like I said, you don't want to use that power of being able to talk to the CEO or the president of the company indiscriminately. You want to use it, like I said, when it matters. And for me, Jamie and I were both really clear about this at the beginning, is that the moment we had a little power, the only thing we tried to do with it was open up our production schedule. So it wasn't just about 3 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It was also about how much time we had budgetarily to film every episode. And by the end of production, I think we had almost like 12 shooting days per episode. Yeah. Just for point of reference, like, that is not common. Normally you want to finish an episode in less than a week. I know that Mike and his incredible team at Dirty Jobs, they were able to do more than one episode a week when they were running on all cylinders. That was really cleverly produced. It's a totally different style of show, obviously, and they just, they had their methodology and it worked great. For us, the more time we had to film each episode, the more time we had to sort of change our direction and adjust a methodology or adjust an episode when it didn't go the way we expected it to. But it also meant that we weren't having to kill ourselves to get the episode done by Friday. And that is humongous, because when you're pushed up against a date like that, you end up overtiring everybody. If you work a 16-hour day, if you work like a 12-hour day on Monday and an 18-hour day on Friday, Monday, no one's back to normal. Everyone's just sort of playing pickup. And I'll tell you, in the first season of MythBusters, we shot 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, and it almost killed us. Like, that is not a we did that for 25 weeks before we went to 5-day weeks. And that was an unsustainable pace. So we pushed to get more time to shoot every episode, because that was both good for us, it was good for the show, and it was good for the crew. It meant that we had more time and space to make the show that we wanted to make. That's the most global thing. That's the most global part about keeping the morale up. On the more specific level, neither Jamie nor I, nor any of the producers we worked with, Steve-O or Alice, were micromanagers. And that's another key thing about crew morale, is not micromanaging your crew. So each of our different producers, whether it was Dennis Kwan or Linda Wolkovich, Jax Marker, Claire Mandel, I mean, we had so many wonderful producers, and each producer would be given a story. Okay, you're going to do, let's say bifurcated boat. This is your story. You're doing bifurcated boat. You got to find all the locations, find the scientific experts, talk to the hosts, figure out what they want to do, set up the permits, set up the shoot. So each producer was always working on one, usually at least 2 stories, one right now and one for the future. And each of our producers built their own relationships with different locations. One producer was really in tight with the people that manages the naval bases around the Bay Area. Another was really in tight with the sheriff's department. Another was really great with some of the rental parking lots we needed to use. And each of those producers really considered those relationships highly sacrosanct. Because if you have a good relationship with a location, and you've shown up, you've paid them the right money, but you've also left the location even better than you found it, that means that when you call them for an emergency, like, hey, I need to use this location tomorrow, do you think we can grease the wheels and get the permits done quickly? That they're more inclined to help. And that specific thing of being able to call a location you have a relationship with and asking for a last minute change of what the shoot was going to be was an absolutely vital part of MythBusters production. I've said this many times before, but a good portion of reality TV is written, like an episode of reality TV is often written down by a producer and then filmed by a crew. It is almost akin to narrative storytelling a lot of the time. And MythBusters was totally not that. This was a show in which you really were filming when we were going. And because of that autonomy we had to sort of follow our noses, both from the host's perspective, Cary Grant, Tori, Jamie, and I, but also from a producer's perspective, it meant that everyone on the crew felt a real sense of ownership over the show. And there's no greater thing for morale than everyone feeling like they're pulling on the same rope, they're pulling in the same direction. Yeah. So we also, there was no hiding of information. It wasn't like we sequestered information from different tiers of the crew based on whether they needed to know that or not. It's like everyone was across everything. And again, yeah, ownership of the show. It's a great question, and it's an ongoing question. Like every time you produce something, you need to, consider your crew's resilience and morale, because if they're happy, your show's going to be better. That's a straight up like direct bit of math. Happy crew means a better show every single time. We already have some questions on the live questions from the actual chat here. Okay, Jonathan L says, have you ever worked with or wanted to work with Disney Imagineering? Yes. Having what they do be tangible in the real world seems to line up with how you prefer to make stuff. Yeah. When I saw those the figures that they were flying through the air that were hitting superhero poses in the air that Grant Imahara was working on, oh man, my eyes did not believe that video when I first watched it, and I just kept on reloading and watching it again and again to kind of wrap my head around how beautiful that whole thing was. Yeah, I have been lucky enough to know many Disney Imagineers over the years, and yeah, it would be a delightful fantasy camp to go work in any aspect with the Imagineering team. I got a tour through Galaxy's Edge in Orlando with the creative director of the Disney properties, and the amount of, it's theme park stuff, right? So it has to be crazy robust and be able to withstand the most egregious abuse that the parks actually undergo. At the same time, it's just got to be the absolute pinnacle of magnificent engineering and aestheticism. So yeah, it does sound like a tremendous amount of fun to me. You're absolutely right. So no, I haven't. Will I in the future? Who's to say? Ken Kauno, I'm sorry, Ken, for butchering your last name. Ken Kauno says, have you ever accepted a job, a movie, commercial, theater, for prop building and instantly regretted it? Here I am doing the math in my head. Should I name the production? Sure, why not? In 1999, in early 1999, my then wife gave birth to my boys. And I had been out of work for about a month. We had just wrapped. Had we wrapped episode 1? I think we had wrapped episode 1, which was why I was out of work. ILM went from like 200 model makers down to very few, and I was looking for work. And on the day my boys were born, I got a call from a prop master on Bicentennial Man, Robin Williams movie based on an Isaac Asimov novel, I, Robot. And it filmed up here in San Francisco because Robin Williams made sure that every film he worked on shot in San Francisco because this is where he lived. Robin just brought untold billions of dollars to the Bay Area because he wanted to shoot movies up here. Everyone in the film industry up here, super grateful to Robin for that. And I had a couple of amazing experiences on that film. In fact, I'll tell you about those first. Let's start with the good stuff. Working on a Robin Williams film meant that I ran into Robin Williams a bunch, and he was amazing and delightful. And meeting Robin is kind of exactly what you would have hoped meeting Robin would be like. He's hilarious, he's attentive, he's crazy smart. And one morning I'm at the craft services table and I'm getting a bagel, and there's Robin in his, like, I think he was in like a jumpsuit, like a spandex jumpsuit, about to get dressed in the robot costume. And we're like making our bagels together, and we're talking about the news that morning. And there was a story in the press that morning about a boat that had foundered off the coast of Florida with like 2.5 tons of cocaine on it. And we were talking about that because it's funny. So Robin starts to do impressions of the kind of people that show up to help in a situation like that. And then after a few of those, and we're laughing, he ends up doing an unbelievable impression of a dolphin that's had too many amphetamines. And that led to something else and to something else and something else. And now I'm standing there with a bagel plate, and it's like half an hour after I'm supposed to have started work over a couple of bays over in the Treasure Island shooting stages. And I realize I must do something that like 10-year-old me would have never imagined I would ever do, which is I had to say, Robin, I have to go to work now. You're getting like a private comedy show from one of the funniest people on the planet, but you also know that commerce isn't going to wait for you and your boss is going to be pissed off. So I actually said, I got to go to work. Oh, okay. I went off to work. I'm still amazed that I somehow had the fortitude to turn off the Robin Williams show that was happening in front of me. About 3 weeks later, I was coming back from the bathroom. And at that point, I was already working with the scissor lift toolboxes shaped like doctor's bags that sat at my table at a table height so that I could work really efficiently. And I came back from the bathroom to my workspace, and Robin was standing at my desk, and he was in the full incredible robot costume that Steve Johnson and the guys at XFX built. And if whatever you think of that movie, and I think it's better than it generally has than its relative cultural opinion. I think it's a pretty good movie. The robot suit in that movie is one of the most beautiful robot suits ever built by anybody, and XFX just did an incredible job. It is all back painted PETG, so it's got this high candy coat finish. It was 100% coverage, so there were like little, nesting hemispheres at the wrists for wrist movement and on the shoulders and the arms. So Robin is standing there at my desk in the full robot suit without the head on, and I come over and I'm like, hey, and he's like, hey, are these your toolboxes? And I said, yeah. And he told me that his grandfather was a tinkerer and that he grew up like in workshops and that his dad would have loved these toolboxes. And we had this whole discussion about toolboxes. Meanwhile, he's like, I said, while you look at the toolboxes, if you don't mind, I'm going to look at the suit. So he's there looking at the toolboxes, and I'm like holding onto his arm and like bending it to learn to see how XFX built the pieces of the suit. Like I said, a delightful human being. There were other aspects of that job that weren't so great. Back then, I don't know how it is, but back then there was not an awesome relationship between LA film crews and San Francisco film crews. At least that was what I was led to understand. And it meant that there were some informational bottlenecks that made our jobs harder. There was also some crew members on our crew that were pains in the ass to work with, but mostly I had a direct supervisor on that show who was not great, and I did not enjoy working for them. Right. And I regretted working on this show within about 3 weeks, and I spent 3 months on it. And they were rough months. The days weren't crazy long, but the work was hard. And again, the work was lovely. The props we built were beautiful. It's just that the way you had to go around building them with the supervisor that I had and some of the coworkers I had to work with, this is just difficult. Let's just say it that way. I ended up with an interesting problem, which was that I didn't want to work on this show anymore. I wanted to not work on Bicentennial Man. And I'm going to give some real inside baseball here. And I couldn't get hired up at Industrial Light and Magic because I was already working on Bicentennial Man in the local union. You can't just jump from one ship to another. So I ended up quitting Bicentennial Man and then trying to get work back up at ILM after about a month or so. And I eventually did. I got to work up in episode 2. Doug Cheng called me and asked me to come to the art department and work on episode 2. And I got to go up to the ranch and work in a little 3rd floor workshop that John Goodson and John Duncan had cobbled together out of what they could find up at the ranch. There literally was a full model shop on the 3rd floor of the big house at the ranch. I had a special key that would only allow me to go to the 3rd floor. It was so amazing. Also, the cafeteria, one of the main cafeterias at the ranch when I was there, again, I still don't know if this is the case, but like it was like a gourmet restaurant that charged you their cost. So like a steak was like $11 or something like that. It was amazing. All right, I think I've gushed enough about ILM. Okay, let's see here. Billy Canimations asks, did you think of MythBusters as a job or a fun hobby that you conveniently got paid for? That is an interesting question, and it leads to some interesting answers. So let's work our way through it, shall we? It was a job. Absolutely. It starts as a job, right? And since I was freelance when MythBusters showed up, I'd been working in the commercial and film special effects industry for about 10 or 11 years at that point. The brain of a freelancer is what's next, what's next, what's next, and everything you do, you give it all of your attention. So Jamie and I jumped into MythBusters later on with Cary Grant and Troy. All of us treated it as absolutely as a job, way more than a hobby that we conveniently got paid for. But I will say that when we first started doing Tested, I definitely did have the mindset in the very beginning of thinking of Tested as a fun hobby that I didn't get paid for, but that I contributed to. I got to build some cool stuff and I got to tell stories about it, but there was an absolute kind of treatment of it as this, something less than a job. I mean, again, because I wasn't getting paid, I own, I'm co-owner of Tested. So in the big picture, I get paid, but not in the granular sense. And I had to admit after a period of time that didn't work for the content that I was making for Tested. There's a real difference between treating it like a job and treating it like, I think that what you're asking about when you say between a job and a fun hobby, with a fun hobby, you kind of get to elide the parts you don't like necessarily. It's pretty easy to sort of put it down. But with a job, you got to get it done by whatever, the end of the day, the end of the project. And basically, I've come around to feeling like everything that I do, while it all began with some hobbiness, the fact is I have learned over my life that if I treat everything as a job, and I don't mean that it's like a slog, but I treat it with the respect that I pay my employment work. If I treat it with that respect, it's going to be better. So I try not to treat anything anymore as if it's like a fun hobby I conveniently get paid for. Yeah. I hope that was useful. All right, let's see what else we've got here. Growing. Wow. Just Christopher Bellflower said, grew up on MythBusters. I hope your house is still standing. He chose to become a mechanical engineer, and thanks for all the knowledge and entertainment over the years. Every one of us is just every one of us who ever worked on MythBusters is so humbled when we hear that kind of thing. Because seriously, we were never thinking of the children. We were just making the show we wanted to make, telling the stories we wanted to tell, trying to do it honestly. And I'm eternally grateful that it actually had some real legs. I think it is almost time. Oh, one more question. Okay. We have a surprise. Okay, let's see here. Keely Cat's mom. Hi, Keely Cat's mom. Says, I know you traveled extensively with MythBusters and touring. What were some of the places that stand out or that you could have never imagined going to? Where would you go back to? We did travel extensively on MythBusters. One of my favorite places we traveled was to South Africa, which is an absolutely magnificently beautiful part of the world. And I feel really grateful that we got to go there. We got to spend like 2 whole weeks filming in Simonstown, on False Bay there, where the great whites leap entirely out of the water. Oh my God, it was so incredible. On the last day of our shoot, we needed a few more shots of great whites. And this was, I think, a day we were like devoting to trying to get some really good phantom high-speed shots of the sharks leaping out of the water. And when you go out to film on the bay like that, you go out at the crack of dawn. So we're up at 5, we're out there by like 5:45, we're out on the water in the swells. And like, just as the light is coming, you're literally waiting for the cameraman. I'm waiting for Scott to go, yeah, we got enough. Okay, we got enough light, go ahead. And what I've got is a foam seal off the back of the boat with some monofilament tied to it. And this is going to be one of the targets. You can't feed the sharks in False Bay. You got to use these non-edible targets that won't damage them if they do bite a chunk out of them. So it's this piece of camping foam in the shape of a seal, like I said, with a piece of monofilament. And I literally, like, I stand up and I toss it into the water, and I'm standing on the transom of a boat, right? So I'm like 2 inches above the water when this great white, that I'm not exaggerating, is maybe like, yeah, this big around, maybe this big around. Yeah. Basically, I put the seal in the water, and here's the progression of events. Seal goes pop, and instantly this mouth comes up and grabs it and goes down. And now I'm holding this reel that's going, and the guys are like, let go of the reel. And I'm like, no. They're like, you got to let go of the reel. If the shark's got the reel, he can pull you in. And I'm like, I've got a shark on monofilament. I am not letting go. This is the most amazing thing in the world. I'm just watching this thing pay out. I'm not trying to stop it or anything. It's just the idea that at the other end of this spinning thing I have, that there's a great white shark, actually probably pissed off that he's bitten into what feels like a paper cracker, right? Like, wow, you guys totally fooled me. Eventually, I did stop the reel, and the shark's tooth cut the monofilament. I felt it go ding, and then like contract. And eventually that seal with a bite in it, not a complete bite, a bunch of teeth marks in it, eventually rose back to the surface. We also got to go to an incredible park. We flew about an hour and a half east of South Africa to a place called Shamwari, which was a nature preserve. And we had an incredible time, an incredible day of seeing lions and cheetahs and giraffes and elephants. Elephants in the wild. It literally was like a bucket list and an amazing thing to see. The most shocking thing about elephants in the wild is how good they are at hiding. It's intense how much an elephant. I mean, you've been looking at like what looks like vegetation, there's nothing around, and all of a sudden, like, elephant walks out. Seriously, they are masters of camouflage, it would seem. I love traveling, and I love seeing things that you don't normally get to see. So another one that really stands out was a few years ago, I was touring through Florida, and I went to Canaveral and got a tour of the vehicle assembly building. This is the building in which they assembled the Saturn V rocket for going to the moon. And it is, at least it was for a long time, one of the tallest freestanding interior space buildings in the world. It's like 575 feet high, and the doors in it are like 550 feet high. You can stand, we got a tour all the way up to the roof. We got to stand on the roof and look at all the Canaveral platforms, which is, again, one of those like, holy cow, I can't believe what I'm getting to see. But then you look down, and seriously, like, weather can move through the building underneath you. That's how crazy that place is. Yeah, I'm very grateful for all the travel we got to do. Now I wanted to tell you, I did wear Blundstones through almost all of MythBusters, and I found out from Blundstone that a lot of people hold on to their shoes, and so do I. So I'm going to go get this old pair of MythBusters Blundstones I have, and meanwhile, Norm Chen is going to tell you some stuff about Blundstone. Norm?
Thanks, Adam. Hey, while Adam's going to grab some boots, I want to let you know. And first of all, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to Blundstone USA for making today's Q&A possible. We have a lot more Q&A coming up, but like Adam says, he wears his Blundstones, and actually, in fact, most of the tested team here wears Blundstones as well. I have my 585s on right now. I got mine about 3 years ago. They've gone with me and tested all around the world. You know, Adam mentioned visiting the Ghostbusters Afterlife movie set. Yep, those are with us there. We've gone to a workshop with them. Jen Schachter wears them. We actually realized when we were filming builds here, and Gunther, who also wears them, was filming them, we noticed in some of our B-roll shots, hey, we're all wearing very similar boots. But Blundstone, it's a true heritage brand and has been making boots for over 150 years. They carry a ton of different styles and colors, including men's and women's boots and work boots and kids' boots, which for someone with a toddler is very exciting to think about. You can shop online and find a local retailer near you at blundstone.com. So once again, thank you, Blundstone USA, for making this live stream and public Q&A possible. And
all right. Adam. Yeah, so Here are my an early pair of my boots from MythBusters. One of the most common ways in which I had to retire boots was specifically these toes would wear through. Um, one of my favorite things is they're waterproof up to the top of this webbing in my experience. So I was fearless about walking through puddles, but once the toe wore through, they were no longer waterproof, and that's often why I had to retire them. But like once a pair of boots looks that great, you can't get rid of them. So I have a whole trophy shelf upstairs in my loft for my blunnies. Yeah. Okay, let's see here. Oh, that's a really good question. Jenny Valton asks, are there any myths that you didn't really want to do but ended up loving? I'm going to have to think about that one because it's a great question and not one I've heard before. So I don't have a ready answer. Vicky Bly, hello, Vicky. Tested premium member Vicky Bly wants to know, I'm rewatching MythBusters, and in season 1, you guys had a snake moving around during the blueprint portion. I'm curious, whose snake was it? Well, I'll tell you. Jamie Heineman used to have the petting zoo from hell. He really did. He had rats, which he raised. And by the way, rats are amazing pets. I'm here to sing the praises of rats. They are super smart. They know their name. They come when you call them. They're delightful companions. They're very affectionate. They love their scritches. Rats are great. So Jamie had rats. That's fine. A lot of people don't like rats. They don't like that bald tail, but they're wonderful pets. He also had a tarantula. The tarantula was purchased as reference for the movie Arachnophobia, for which Mr. Heineman built the several of the mechanisms that help the spiders walk. I'm doing this motion because one of the mechanisms was effectively like an organ grinder's calliope sort of thing. And when you turned it, it adjusted all of these cables and allowed a spider to walk. When they were working on that film up at CWI, they bought a tarantula for production as reference so they could see how it moved and get the paint and color and all that right. And anyway, Jamie kept that tarantula and they lived for a long time. So he had it for a long time. And then to round out the petting zoo from hell, he had a snake, a boa constrictor named Gomez. I think it was Gomez. I'm pretty sure it's Gomez. I think it's Gomez. I don't even know why I'm second guessing myself. The snake's name was Gomez. Now, Gomez came in... the blueprint wasn't, I don't think, Gomez's first appearance on MythBusters. There's wait, right. Okay. One of the most common questions we get is, was there anything you filmed that didn't make it to air? And the answer is very rarely. Almost everything we filmed made it to air in some form or another, except for a myth we did in the very first season. And the myth was, I'm sure when you were a kid, you're in the grocery store and your mom is filling the grocery cart with stuff for the house. And you're like, hey, Mom, could we get this Super Sugar Crisp cereal or the Fruit Loops or the Captain Crunch or the Boo Berry or whatever sugary cereal you wanted? And your mom said, hell no, the box is probably better for you than the cereal inside. And we thought that that was a testable proposition. So the way we decided to test it is we set up we used white lab mice as our test subjects. We had 9 of them in 3 cages. Okay, so we had one cage that was a control. These were mice getting mouse food, the little compressed pellets that they like to eat. Those were our control group. Then we had mice that were eating Fruit Loops. Yep. They were getting fed on the same schedule as the mice eating the control food. And then we had a third group of mice, 3 in each cage. The third group of mice was eating cardboard. Now, it wasn't just cardboard. We didn't just like throw the box in there. We wanted to let the mice know that the cardboard was edible. And the best way we thought to do that, Jamie came up with this whole methodology because it turns out that Jamie owned a pet shop in high school. Seriously, not kidding. Jamie Heineman owned a pet shop in high school. Yeah. Anyway, so what Jamie did was he posited that the mice would be used to looking at their food in the pellet form. So he took cardboard, blended it in a blender, added a little water, and then compressed it using some tubes into the shapes of the mice pellet food. It was a great idea. He even added artificial sweetener to like see if that would help. Turns out mice can't taste artificial sweetener. I really don't know how we know that, but apparently that's true. That's an experiment I'd like to look up the methodology of. At any rate, so again, 3 cages, 3 mice each. Control, Fruit Loops, cardboard. Control's going fine. Oh, and each day we're going in and we're weighing the mice on a little scale to see if their weights are changing. And I mean, these mice weigh grams, right? Like less than an ounce. They're absolutely tiny. But we're logging their weights every day. And we started on a Monday. Here comes Friday. Mice all seem to be doing fine. The mice in the cardboard cage seem a little twinky. They seem a little to have like faster reactions to stuff than the mice in the other 2 cages, but it doesn't look like anything egregious is going on. And Jamie Heineman, again, because he owned the pet store, is the one monitoring this. So Friday night, he turns out all the lights, he sees all the cages, does the weighing and the logging, turns off the shop and goes home. Monday morning, we come in and everything is very different. Not in the control cage or the Fruit Loops cage. Everything is still normal in those, and those mice weigh exactly the same as they did at the beginning of the experiment. In the cardboard cage, however, there has been events. There is no longer 3 mice in the cardboard cage. There's 1 really, really fat mouse and 2 carcasses. Yeah. I mean, and they looked like Bugs Bunny cartoons of a carcass. It was like head, rib cage, tail. Like the big one had eaten them like corn on the cob. And so of course we nicknamed him Killer. And I mean, this wasn't our intent. We did not want this to happen. It doesn't mean we're going to, we just thought, okay, well, we just got to finish this sequence. So I pulled him out and I was like, well, Killer. And I turned to the camera and I said, this is what can happen when mice attack. We thought that was pretty funny. And then we fed that mice to Jamie's snake Gomez because it was feeding time and it seemed like Hakuna Matata, circle of life. And we're just pleasing ourselves. I mean, we just thought that was funny. And apparently when Discovery saw the footage, they thought it was funny too, but instructed us to never air it. And I don't think we have. In fact, I had a rough cut of that episode and I showed part of that rough cut at a college. And this is got to be 2005. And I got a call from Discovery Corporate that was like, destroy that copy of the episode you have and don't show it again. So that was the very first appearance of Gomez the snake. But you never saw it. So it was not officially the first appearance of Gomez the snake was during the blueprint. How did it feel being in the water with sharks on the repellent? Lee Marsh, hi Lee, tested premium member. How did it feel? Tested patron, sorry, thank you, patron. How did it feel being in the water with sharks on the repellent myth using dead shark smell? Well, I love the fact that sharks are repelled by the smell of other dead sharks. I think that's a very good policy on the sharks front. And if they asked me, I would tell them, don't change that policy. Being in the water with sharks is always a mix of, it's spooky. It's certainly spooky. And I think it's spooky. I spent a lot of time thinking about why it's upsetting, why it's obvious. There's the obvious reason, right? You don't want to get bitten. You don't want this thing to come out and get you, obviously. But recognize that for like a shark researcher, shark attacks are still so rare, they're statistically non-existent. On the order of people going to the beach and getting in the water, shark attacks are almost a non-number from a statistical standpoint. They're surpassingly rare. So on a rational front, I'm not that nervous. But at the same time, water is like, it's a portal. It is a portal. It's horizontal, whereas most of our video game portals are vertical. But it is a portal, and it's a portal to another world. And sharks are the masters of that world. Well, they're one of the masters of that world. So yeah, there's a way in which that you always feel, because I belong on this side of the portal and they belong on that side, I feel like they've got the advantage because most of me is on their side. But the fear was really minor. Frankly, doing Shark Week and repeatedly getting in the water with sharks remains one of the most rewarding and incredible things I've ever gotten to do. Sharks are so beautiful. And getting to spend hours and hours diving with them, unparalleled. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Heading out there with, whether it was with Doc's crew on Bimini or Stuart Cove's Dive Bahamas, working with Luke Tipple, who spent so much time at Guadalupe. I've always wanted to go out to the Farallon Islands. I mean, we did film out there we did circle the Farallons on one of our very first Shark Week episodes. But yeah, it's a real treat. And the very first time I got into water with a bunch of shark researchers and saw sharks was one of the most frightening things that has ever happened to me. All I remember from that was like being in about 40 feet of water off the coast of Bimini. We're above a white sand bottom, and you kind of need that so you can see them. And there's this just like small, like 1 acre patch of white sand that we were snorkeling over. And it was like 10 of us all holding hands above this sort of place where sharks frequented, and we started seeing them. And first of all, you need the right eyes to see them, right? Because they are somewhat camouflaged. But once you see them, then you can spot them. And we're looking, and I'm just sort of like and looking around, like breathing heavier and heavier. All I can hear is my breath and then I looked down and I saw, I don't know how big it is. Underwater sharks look gargantuan. Underwater, a 7-foot shark feels like it's like 20 feet long because they're wider than you think. They have more girth than you imagine. And then I looked down and saw what seemed to be an absolutely massive hammerhead shark. I don't think it was a massive hammerhead shark, probably like 10 or 12 feet long. But the hammerhead shark, the way it was moving through, just felt so alien and so other. That remains one of the spookiest things I've seen underwater. The other one was we were diving in a place called Tiger Beach, about 60 miles off Grand Bahama. This is where we filmed the last Shark Week episode that we did with some of the shark cage stuff. Me in the suit of armor, that's where that was filmed. And at one point when we were down there, a tiger shark came through on the hunt. And a shark on the hunt has a very different sort of set of circumstances. There's a way in which its fins are oriented and the way it swims and the way it's positioned itself, that the shark divers we were with knew that this was a danger, and they like got close to me and hustled me into the shark cage. That was spooky. Seeing the hammerhead for the first time that early time was even spookier. It was really, really upsetting and amazing. Amazing. I'm no longer scared of jumping into the water with sharks. And I can't wait till I get to do it again. So yeah, I strongly recommend it. I circled a couple of other stories here. Let's see here. This is so Charles White. I've referred to this question earlier. Charles White says, how did MythBusters refocus in quick turnaround after coming up with a system and a methodology that looked great on paper, but when in practice you had to rework it, especially when you're working under time crunches to get the episode wrapped? And he points out, example would be all the work to implement the octopus method and then having to scrap it and go with the box method when we were trying to lift the car with a vacuum. This is a great question. And this is one in which everybody understanding the mission was super, super important. And it goes back to not micromanaging. Film is a wonderful industry that, in my experience, lacks the heavy-handedness of micromanagers. Like it doesn't seem to attract micromanagers, nor should it. Everyone on the film crew understands their job and where their priorities intersect with other people's, and how those all lead to getting the job done by the end of the day. And on the MythBusters crew, one of the ways we managed quick turnarounds for stuff like that when it wasn't going right was, as I said earlier, the relationships that our producing team built with different locations and different resources that we used. That was one of the most key ways in which we were able to pivot on very short notice. And nothing is more important than being able to pivot on short notice when something's not going right. The other one is, like, Jamie and I were really good at talking each other out of the sunk cost fallacy. And like, all right, yeah, it's time to abandon this and start from scratch. And again, that's about like knowing what your priorities are. I realized, like, okay, if we do this, I think when we did that, we realized that it was going to add like 4 minutes. Right then we know, okay, this is going to be a story beat. The octopus method isn't working. We're going to have to switch to the vacuum method. We're not going to be able to cover the vacuum, the straight box method in as great a detail as we did the octopus method, because we have to get it done in a short period of time, but we do feel confident that we can do it. And that was the one of like Jamie and I comparing notes with each other. Okay, this thing that we thought would be the higher percentage working thing, and it doesn't work. Jamie and I were really clear. The priority is we got to get something spectacular to happen by the end of the day. And it can't be just that we can't lift the car. It's either that we lift the car and it fails spectacularly and falls. But the one thing that can't happen is that we don't end up lifting the car, because we know this is feasible. We know this is possible. I always loved those moments working with Jamie on that sort of thing of like, all right, we've talked through all the possibilities. Can we call it? Can we finish this by the, and I don't even think we had to add an extra day of production for that one, which is pretty amazing. We did, this is one of the things that we would say at that point. We would say to in working with our producer, we'd be like, yeah, we can do it in this new way, but you guys are just going to have to film it verite. Like, we can't stop and talk a lot because we have to bust ass. We have like 4 hours. We think we can get this done in time, but we're going to have to go and we'll catch as catch can in terms of catching up with the pieces to camera. We call them PMTs, sort of a dumb nomenclature meant post-match talk or pre-match talk. Look, essentially with every episode, with everything that we did, we talk about what we were going to do. Then we talk about what we thought was going to happen. Then in the middle of it, we talk about what was happening. And at the end of it, we talk about what just happened, what we learned from it, and where we were going next. And as long as we got all those pieces to camera per sequence, we were able to move on. But sometimes with something like the box method, we had to like hunker down and just build while they filmed. Yeah, everyone keeping their own priorities. Yeah. All right. Let's see. I had another one circled here that I wanted to talk about. What David Martin wants to know, what was working with Billy Joel like? Yes, I worked with Billy Joel. I was actually wait, before I tell you this story, I know that a lot of you already know this story, but I was recently at a couple of cons where the cast of The Boys was Jack Quaid, Anthony Starr, Aaron, and all the other cast are amazing. Karen Fukuhara, they're super sweet. That whole cast, I mean, I know they play some of the most messed up villains and characters on television. In person, they are all delightful humans. And in the second season, this isn't a spoiler, but in the second season of The Boys, one of the regular leitmotifs of the season is Jack Quaid's character's love of Billy Joel music. And so each episode sort of features one or two Billy Joel songs. And in one episode, we hear the song Second Wind, You're Only Human, which is a Billy Joel song nobody knows about. But I got to tell Jack Quaid that I actually am in the music video for You're Only Human. I play the scrawny kid who drowns, and I recorded that. It was my second acting job in the world, and I filmed it in 1984 when I was 16. That blew their minds. Delightful about that. And so I got to spend 3 days filming this music video with Billy Joel, who was a freaking delight. Like, so Billy Joel and his band played here in San Francisco a couple of years ago. For the first time in like 30 years, they played Pac Bell Park. And I got to go. I have some members of my road crew overlap with some members of Billy Joel's road crew. And when you know the road crews, you know all the secrets to the world, because the road crews, they run everything. And Billy Joel's crew was very gracious and welcoming. I brought my boys, thing one and thing two. And so we got backstage passes. We got to hang out back there. And it was incredible. Fantasy camp. Insane. And they let Billy know that I was there. And he came out. He came out and hung out with me and the boys for about half an hour. And he was like, so is it really true? I'm going to give him a slight New York accent. I know he's more from Long Island and I can't do his accent exactly, but he's like, is it true? What was your first acting job? And I was like, yeah, it's absolutely true. And he's like, oh, what a terrible video. He's like, we had to make those videos in the 80s. That was what you had to do. They were always a little weird, which is true. It is a terrible video. So it's such a terrible video that when I showed it to my wife the first time, we were halfway through a 3-minute video. And my wife was like, is there any more of you in this? Because I'm not sure I can take it. But that also was what Billy was like on the set. He was not precious. He was not removed from everything. He was just out and among us the whole time we were filming around New York for 3 days. I got a mild hypothermia by shooting the drowning scene at Coney Island in, I think, like mid-November. And Billy Joel's trailer was the only one with heat, so I warmed up in that. I think he even brought some beers to the cast later on. And actually, Christy Brinkley also came by the set because they were married at that point, and she like said hello to everybody. She personally greeted everyone on the crew. That high quality humans. And may I say, Billy Joel's voice is still freaking perfect. So it was lovely to both work with him at the age of 16, meet him again in my 50s, and find the same guy. And I grew up on Billy Joel's music. He's the Bruce Springsteen of Long Island and that part of New York, and as such, like, was absolutely one of my heroes. Glass Houses and The Stranger are literally just like hardwired into my pop music brain. Super important. Love that guy. Lubo in China, which is a great name for a show. Lubo in China. Lubo in China says, what was the most theoretically difficult myth to test? I mean, physics, chemistry, the stuff usually done by PhDs in research. Well, okay, the one that comes to mind is break step bridge. That still is a real ass kicker of a story to get right. So in break step bridge, the myth is that if you have a bridge and soldiers are marching across it in step, which means they're all taking their steps in syncopation with each other, that syncopation can set up what's called a fatal harmonic, to where the bridge starts to move underneath them. And there's this particular way in which humans try and stop something from moving when it's moving, and they actually make it worse. This happened on the Millennium Bridge in London, and required them to close it down and add a bunch of structure to it. So the myth is that soldiers marching on a bridge can cause a harmonic that can cause the bridge to fail. And it's an easy myth to state. It is really hard to test because, first of all, you're not going to take a full-size bridge and put a bunch of soldiers on it. So because you want to give it the best chance of failing. You want to give the bridge the best chance of failing. You don't want to prove it by like, well, we marched in step and it didn't work. You really want to try and give it the effort to make it work. You want to try and impart that fatal harmonic. And within engineering, and specifically the engineering of structures, fatal harmonics are a known thing, and something that you anticipate and accommodate for. The thing about testing it for a bridge in scale, which was where we had to go with it, is that bridges are like ludicrously over-designed. And so, like, when you are, in order to get this to work, you need to bring the bridges, the threshold of the bridge's ability to stay together needs to be close to the threshold of the energy being generated by the soldiers. You need to bring these two energies to be close to each other, because if you just march a bunch of soldiers on the Golden Gate Bridge, it's not going to do anything. It's too big. So you need to build a bridge small enough that you can see if a fatal harmonic will harm it, and then you need to impart that fatal harmonic. And this is actually one of the biggest fights that Jamie and I had on the show, and it was in like season 2. Could it have even been season 1? No, I think it might have been early in season 1. Because we got in a huge argument about it. He had these 90-degree pneumatic actuators that he wanted to put boots on. And I didn't like that idea, because pneumatics, when you're talking about a fatal harmonic, you're talking about a periodicity where each time the bridge moves, you're imparting more, and like pushing someone on a swing. Okay, when you're pushing someone on a swing to make them go higher, you're not pushing them at a constant beat. Each time they're coming back to you with a certain amount of energy, you're meeting that energy and increasing it, which means the periodicity of that swing is changing, and you need to be able to change dynamically in order to impart that fatal harmonic. I apologize to all the actual mechanical engineers out there that I'm probably getting a lot of the terms here wrong, but I think I'm getting the explanation pretty close to accurate. And in the end, Jamie won. I think he wore me out on that one. I still disagree with that experiment. I didn't want to use the pneumatics because I didn't. So sorry, I got ahead of myself. You want to impart a periodicity that is highly specific. And I mean, we're talking down to the millisecond in terms of being able to add energy into that system to see if it will harm the system. And pneumatics are just not as accurate, right? Pneumatics, it's a soft system. There's backlash, and you can't make a pneumatic thing hit a perfect beat down to the millisecond, especially if you want to dynamically time it and change it over time. You need something like, and we actually did this, and I don't know if it was for brake step bridge. I think it might have been. We had a linear actuator that was magneto driven, so that there was like coils and a magnet, like a tube with magnets, reverse polarity all the way down, and the coils, as you turn them on, could actually move the actuator. Grant Imahara, this was an actuator that was so new, there was no programming for it. So we got the actuator from the company, but then Grant Imahara had to custom write software for activating the coils and getting it to move back and forth on the timeline that we wanted. And that's the level of accuracy that you need for that story. Over the intervening years, the more I've learned about bridge design and bridge engineering, the more I realize how far out of our depth we were in the execution of that story. So I still think of it as one of the biggest pains in the ass for us in terms of a story we were less than qualified. Look, I'm not going to say we were qualified to test everything, but like that one, we were definitely farther out of our depth than we realized. And I've come to understand now just how far out of our depth we were. James Dutro says, on the subject of your time in film, did you ever suffer from creativity burnout? I wouldn't say creativity burnout. I would say every time you finish a big thing, there's like a dip in the mood. That's certainly true. But creativity burnout, in film, no. But that's also because I wasn't doing a lot of decision making in film that was like mission critical decision making. I'm talking about my time working as a model maker in the film and television industry, where I've had not burnout, but I had what was called, what was it? Some decision fatigue. That is definitely a thing. It was easier on MythBusters, where we had a large crew and a lot of people taking care of stuff. And like when Jamie or I encountered something that we found super onerous, some bit of subject matter or a build that we just weren't thrilled about, we would often say, do you want to take this one? And like the other one would take it. We did that both ways. We did that in both directions. But on Savage builds, where that's my show, I don't have a collaborator on the show. I have a whole crew of collaborators, but the decisions all come down to me and my producer, John Tessier. But like, everyone's coming at you. And as somebody said in the film Showrunner, they've only got questions and you're the only one with the answers. I definitely had several days on Savage builds where I was like, someone came to me and was like, should this be red or blue? And I was like, I have to go home now. Like just having to answer red or blue was like, my brain was like, and then I found out there was a thing called decision fatigue. Like once you've made a certain number of decisions, your brain was like, we're done. Send us home. Give us a cup of tea. Give us a night's sleep, and we'll come back with some answers tomorrow. Yeah. Also, one of the reasons I don't think I suffered from creativity burnout is how well Industrial Light and Magic, I felt like all of my job supervisors at ILM took really good care of their crews. That really, like, that was a place that had institutionalized good job supervision in the model shop, particularly. The various people I worked with, whether it's Lauren Peterson, Steve Gawley, Brian Grenand, Vaughn Davis, these are all soups who really pay attention to their crews, and they want everyone to have a good time, and they want the job to be excellent, and they want it to be the highest possible quality, but they also want you to have fun while you're doing it. And that makes a big difference. I know that not everyone gets to work in situations like that. So that's definitely, I think it might be unique to ILM and some other places. I don't know. but that was my experience. Ryan of the Angels, that's literally how they're written. Ryan of the Angels asks, Adam, did your background working behind the scenes in theater and film influence how you interacted with the crews once you became on-screen talent? By the way, thanks, shout out and thanks to the testing crew for all they do. Yes, my time on my time behind the scenes informs everything with how I behave on set. So I showed up into commercial special effects in the early 90s, and I was like we're saying, I was behind the scenes. I was building models. So I'd build models for a couple of weeks. Then the camera crews would show up. We'd set up the commercial on the sound stage. The clients would come. They'd be in their own video village with all their laptops making their decisions. The director would be, moving around making decisions. Jamie, my boss at the time, we'd be running our stuff. And then once it was all set up and you were ready to shoot and the lighting was done and the rig was ready to go, excuse me, they would say, bring in the talent. And that meant bring in the on-screen person who was going to be in that commercial. You always called them the talent. And in every single time someone said, let's bring in the talent, people in the crew went, just a little bit of a snicker. Because it's funny in a crew full of every film crew is an army of problem solvers, as David Mamet said, and an army of really smart, intuitive, dedicated, hardworking problem solvers. And when you have a whole bunch of those people working for days and sometimes weeks to make something, and then at the very end you say, let's bring in the talent, it definitely has a specific ring to it. And it's a ring that invites a little bit of, not derision, but let us say a playful resetting of what the hierarchy is. So I'm cognizant when I just shot some commercials recently. When I step onto a commercial set, like they don't know how I'm going to be. They haven't met me. They don't know if I'm going to show up and be an asshole. They don't know if I'm going to be late or if I'm going to have strange demands. And I want my tombstone to say, he was nice to work with. Seriously, I really, really do. And I like showing up and setting the expectations nice and high that I'm going to be agreeable and easy to work with, because I am. There are hills that I will die on, but I'm not going to insult anybody about them. Hopefully those have been worked out contractually before I'm standing on set. But even still, I can disagree in a civil manner. And I like being easy to work with. I like working on a crew in which everyone's relaxed. Again, when the crew is happy, it's going to make a better show. So absolutely. Actually, the sound guy on these commercials I was working on was like, wow, you're really across all the sound stuff. Because I was like, well, I'd like to put it here, but if I'm going to wear this coat, maybe you want to put it here. I can pop a hole and we can run it on my back. And he was like, thanks for helping me solve all these problems. And I'm like, we're all just here trying to get the job done. I also find that film crews that I have been lucky enough to work with, whether it's on The Expanse or on commercial shoots or other stuff, know that I come from that side of the camera and are very gracious and complimentary. And so that is really nice to be welcomed. You step into a film crew you don't know. It's like high school cafeteria time. You're staring at a room full of people you don't know, and they all work with each other. They all know each other. How are you going to fit in? I have found literally all the film crews I have worked with since working on MythBusters to be delightful and highly welcoming. That's a great question, Ryan of the Angels. Thank you. Adam Kerr says, people often ask about what myth did you wish you did but never could get to. He'd love to know what myth we did do that we wished we had left alone. Oh yes, there is one, and it is pyramid power. I'm really sorry about that one. The myth in pyramid power is that if you have a blade, do I have a blade here? No, here we go. That if you have a blade, like a single-edged razor blade like this, and it is dull, you can put it underneath a pyramid, and by some magic of physics, that pyramid will make the blade sharper. This is malarkey on toast. It doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely asinine. It falls into the realm of hunting for ghosts. It's a fiction. We're in total fictional territory here. But at the same time, understand this is like, I think we did this in season 3. Faz, who was the producer on that, was producing the M7 team and looking for material, we had already burned through most of the Darwin Awards and most of the urban legends that we found in the canon of urban legend literature within the first 2 seasons. YouTube didn't exist at that point. Twitter was definitely not there. Videos that went viral were barely a thing, except for those Orson Welles commercials. And so we were struggling in the early days, I think, of the early seasons to look for new avenues for viable material, for viable testable ideas. And like I said, Twitter and YouTube ended up being probably half of our myth load by the end of the show because of how fertile they were for spreading disinformation. Boy, do we know about that now. But in the early days, we're like, maybe James Bond stories have some legs for us. And in this one, somebody suggested pyramid power. I don't remember who. And Faz and the team did their job to build a methodology for it. But the basic premise is so unattached to reality that I'm sad that we did it. Because that falls into what James Randi would have called the woo-woo stories. Woo-woo meaning like, how does it work? Woo! It's magic. That's really. The other one is, do pretty girls fart? I mean, Jesus Christ. What are we, 8? I also wish we hadn't done that one. There's this moment in which Jamie says panties to Carrie, and she's like, could we stop saying panties? It's creeping me out. Which is completely right. And I still feel retroactively bad that we were like calling them flatus proof panties. And yeah, I wish we hadn't done that one either. Okay, so 2. Let's see here. Ooh, wow. Billy Canimations wants to know, what was your favorite movie to cover that had the best myths on MythBusters? So I mentioned James Bond. The funny thing was in those early days, we did a James Bond story early on, and we thought when we did it that there would be all of this exciting material from the James Bond franchise, because all these movies, all these stunts, all this really cool stuff, always the gadgets with Q. I mean, every movie seemed to have a structure engendered to give MythBusters testable propositions to experiment on. What we found instead was, like pyramid power, so many of the James Bond myths are so unhingedly detached from reality that they're not even wrong. The idea that you could fit a laser that could cut through steel in a watch is ridiculous. It's not feasible yet, not even remotely close to feasible. So I think we ended up doing maybe 3 James Bond specials all told. And that was like pulling teeth to get that third one. Like, it was really, really difficult to find material. We're like, every one of us is combing through all the synopses, watching the movies, trying to find stuff to test. And there just wasn't as much there as we thought there might be. I have to say the best franchise from which we got testable phenomenon was Breaking Bad. Yeah, full stop, without a doubt. And that comes from Vince Gilligan, the showrunner, being like super dedicated to science and being scientifically accurate. I'll tell you a story about Vince. One of the very last myths, actually the last myth we did with Breaking Bad, was the machine gun setup from Felina, the episode finale. Yeah, there's going to be some spoilers in here about Breaking Bad. If you haven't watched it, oh my God, I'm so jealous that you get to watch it for the first time. At the very end of very end of Breaking Bad, both actually. I think this is a penultimate season myth, maybe even a final season myth. At the very end of Breaking Bad, Bryan Cranston's character sets a machine gun up on remote control in the trunk of a car, so it can shoot all the bad guys. And we set that same thing up, set up the same rig, built the same oscillating rig using a garage door opener that he did. We found all the exact same parts, got a real machine gun. We practiced firing it. That was really amazing. And then we set it up and we fired at a wall that was just like the wall that it was firing at in Breaking Bad. And when it was over, Vince Gilligan was like over at the wall and he's going like, oh man, I can see that the bullets are gathering up at the ends of the run. And I didn't know that because on set, I was telling him exactly where to drill every hole. And now I see that I got it wrong. I know I'm somewhat butchering Vince's wonderful Virginia accent, but he really is like that bubbly and sweet all the time. And I don't know how that brain comes up with such dark, abidingly dark narratives. But in person, he's like one of the nicest people alive. And so the very first story we did with them was not sulfur hexafluoride. It was hydrofluoric acid. That's it, hydrofluoric acid, which is what Jesse Pinkman and Walter White used to dissolve the body of, was it Crazy 8? I think it was Crazy 8. Yeah. Yeah, those were some great stories. Oh my God, dissolving that body in acid. First of all, hydrofluoric acid is terrifying stuff. They use it for etching glass, but if you literally spilled like a shot glass of it on your foot, it would eat all the calcium in your bones and you'd die in a couple of days. I'm not kidding. This stuff is so awful to work with. We went to Cal with these big hoods wearing this gear to actually experiment with it. It didn't turn out to be very good at dissolving bodies at all. What was good at dissolving bodies was this stuff that was called piranha, which was sulfuric acid with a chemical booster that I still think I'm not supposed to mention, so I won't. It dissolved that body in less than a minute and a half, but it would have ruined the entire house it was in. It created this plume of black smoke. We were like 175 feet away on another rise away from where this was happening, and the wind shifted and the chemical smoke started blowing towards us. We had to hustle. The whole film crew is running to get away from this cloud of noxious cloud that is coming towards us. Yeah, without a doubt, Breaking Bad, our favorite franchise to test from. And if we were still doing the show, I tell you, we would be doing stuff from Better Call Saul. That would totally be the case. How are we doing for time? We're doing all right? A couple more? Excellent. I'm having so much fun, you guys. These questions are great, by the way. Thank you so much, everybody. What was the most, Nate P., what was the most memorable MythBusters project you worked on with Grant? That's a tricky one because by the time Grant came in season 3, we were mostly codified as shooting separately. Carrie, Tori, and Grant filmed over at M7, and Jamie and I filmed over at M5. But we definitely cross-collaborated. You know what? It is actually going to be. It was actually that linear actuator that he designed the programming for. That was one of those ones where when we first realized that this actuator existed, we thought it solved all our problems. Then we realized there was no code for it, so we thought nobody could solve our problems. Then it turned out that Grant could solve our problems and did. And that was awesome. That was one of those first times. I mean, remember, Grant was the only one of all of the hosts who actually had a degree in the sciences or engineering. And so for him to be able to come in and solve that problem, and the way Grant worked was that, like, he never showed you the stress. Like, I had certainly seen Grant stressed over the years, but like when he worked, he would kind of, you'd tell him the brief, you'd talk about how to do it, he'd go away and come back with the thing that worked, which is frankly, from an engineering standpoint, highly annoying, right? Like everything I do is 3 or 4 iterations. The first one's going to be an absolute crap show and slowly gets better. That guy would go away and come back and be like, I hope this is working. And it's like, perfect. All right, let's see here. Oh, Russell Sperry wants to know what the most uncomfortable day on MythBusters was. Haha. Okay, this is a good one to finish with. It's not one you think. It's not flying in the back of a F-18 Hornet and vomiting repeatedly. That was not uncomfortable at all. In fact, repeated vomiting in the back of a F-18 Hornet does not diminish from the pleasure of flying in a Hornet at all. I think if anyone else out there has ridden in one, I think you can attest to that. No, the fact that the day we were having sucked does not show up in the episode, but I remember it as being the most grueling day we ever had. And it's whirlpool of death. The idea is that a whirlpool that's spinning can suck you down with it. And we actually went out on the bay. Oh, wow, right. We went out on the San Francisco Bay with the Coast Guard crew, the Coast Guard cutter that is stationed just north of the bridge down there in Marin. And we went out because there are whirlpools you can find in the bay as the tide's letting out. We're like looking at these active whirlpools. And there's this moment in which Jamie and I are staring at the whirlpools. And I think, if I remember correctly, Peter Heap was shooting. And he was like, Jamie, say something. Our camera crew is all Aussie. And Jamie was like, whirlpools and whirlpools and whirlpools, which sounded like Jamie was reciting poetry. And I thought that was really funny. But then it came time, once we had witnessed some whirlpools, to make our own. And to make our own, we used I think we used the same blow molded polyethylene container we used for our quicksand story. So this container was 8 feet in diameter and I think 16 feet high. And to use it for Whirlpool of Death, what we did was we had a huge inlet at the bottom and this massive pump with like an 18-inch intake. And we fed it to go at the bottom in a circle, right? Like, so fed along the bottom edge of this thing with an output on that same line. Oh, no. We did it up right. Our output was up close to the top and our outlet was in the bottom. And this allowed us to put water in and pull it out. And so we were able to build a beautiful whirlpool. The problem was this was out on Alameda. I think it was close to this time of year. It was late fall and cold, like 48 degrees. Like San Francisco doesn't usually get that cold. I know the rest of the world is like, but like it was bitterly cold. And it was also doing that kind of ever so slightly pissing rain that is worse than real rain because it just means everyone's slightly damp. And because you're slightly damp and it's like 40 degrees, everyone is bone cold. And we're working with this 16-foot tall container full of water around which we've built painter's scaffolding, which is not the most like engineeringly robust stuff to walk around on. And it's raining, so it's slippery and it's cold and we're all bone cold and we're bone tired. And for some reason, I can't even remember, we had to get this episode completely in the can by the end of the day, which was a real ball breaker of a thing to get done. So we're filming right up until dark. I go in the whirlpool to do the experiment. I'm in a wetsuit, but still I'm freezing cold. I'm spinning around. We had a big pizza dinner. I threw it up. I'm in the water that I threw up in. I'm super uncomfortable. I'm nauseous. I don't feel great. We do get the episode done by the end of the day, but like this is also before we knew how to set up real craft services or comfort for our crew. This is an early location shoot. It's like season 2, I think. So we just had no amenities. We're like in these big open spaces with no doors on them and the wind's blowing through and we're trying to eat some cold sandwiches and there's like, it was awful. Everything about that day sucked except the very last part. And here's where I'll wrap up. So we go through this really rough, long day in the cold. We're all tired. We're all beat. I have just gone into the experiment. I've done the experiment. I'm nauseous. I've thrown up. I go over to my car to nap because I feel pretty compromised. And I nap a little bit and then I wake up and now it's totally dark because we filmed all the way until sundown. Now it's totally dark outside and I can see that, I can look out the window and I can see that Jamie is moving the giant forklift to be able to move this container out of the way. I further know that if he's doing that, I'm probably the only other person that can really work directly with him to help him. So I come out of my car, my hair is all like this, and I'm like, I look over at Jamie, and this is one of those things about him and I. Like, he looks at me and he's like, and I know that precisely what he means is, can you spot the lifting of this to make sure both it's balanced and that the crew is safe and that there's a reasonable exclusion zone? I know that's precisely what he means by what he gestured. And then I'm like, And so I start, yeah, okay, Steve, over there. Yeah, start. Okay, okay, good. Yeah, we're good. That's what's good over there. Great. Okay, Heinemann, you can go up, start to pull it up. Okay, great. We're going to clear the path. You're going to pull out. And we do all of this communication with each other, Heinemann and I, without any words. It is eye contact and like gestures. And because in those moments, our brains ran on just like such parallel tracks from an engineering standpoint, there's such a pleasurable experience to do something big and dangerous in a way that is safe because you're working with someone you trust. That was freaking delightful. So the worst day on set was finished by like one of the more delightful inter-brain communications I've had. Thank you guys so much. Thank you also to Blundstone USA for sponsoring this live stream. The questions were fabulous. Thank you to Tested Patron members. If you'd like to know how to become a Tested Patron members, you can find it on our website, tested.com, or on our YouTube channel. It's always printed in the comments below our videos. I am Adam Savage. Please stay safe, stay healthy, have a great day, and I will see you guys next time. Cheers. Adam out.